Welcome back to Wish as we read chapter 8 and 9. Chapter 8. One Saturday, Howard was going to help me look for Wishbone. But first, I had to go shopping with Bertha. I haven't been to Asheville in ages, she said, getting behind the wheel of Gus's old car. It started with a rumble, sending puffs of black smoke drifting out the tailpipe and floating over the yard. As we wound our way down the mountain and into the highway, Bertha chattered nonstop. She told me about the time she and Gus went camping and a baby bear got into their cooler and stole their hot dogs. Can you believe that? She said. A bear eating hot dogs? She talked about how much she hated snakes and how when a tiny brown garter snake got in the house once, she stayed with her friend Jolene for nearly a week till Gus swore on the Bible that it was gone, and she could hardly stop laughing long enough to tell me about the time some guy named Arthur Kruger got drunk and lost his false teeth at the church picnic. I didn't even want to hear about where those teeth would turn up, she said, wiping her eyes. I didn't eat any more potato salad after that, that's for sure. Finally, I figured I'd have to interrupt her, so I did. But what about you and Mama? I asked. What do you mean? Tell me something about y'all. Oh, well, let's see now. I waited, watching her face, seeing her searching for just the right thing to tell me. Well, when I was about 10, she said. So let's see, Carla would have been about 7. She spent the whole summer making yarn bracelets to sell so we could buy fish for an aquarium our uncle gave us. Yarn bracelets? I wondered how come Mama never showed me how to make yarn bracelets. Then, Bertha went on, this mean boy who lived across the street from us threw every one of those bracelets up into the hickory nut tree in our front yard, way up in the branches so we couldn't get them down. She shook her head. Isn't that so mean? What did y'all do? Well, that's when I'm telling this story because it's just so like Carla, she said. She stomped over to that boy, bit him on the hand so hard he hollered like she'd cut off his hand with the butcher knife. Then he ran home crying while she hollered cuss words at him. Bertha chuckled. That girl had some kind of temper, she said. A temper? Maybe I didn't get my temper from Scrappy after all. Maybe I got my temper from Mama. I hesitated, but then I decided just to go for it. How come y'all stopped seeing each other? I asked, hoping maybe this time she'd give me a better answer than she had before. Bertha stared out on the road. Well, when we got to be teenagers, we were so busy with this and that and the other thing, and then she dropped out of high school, and the next thing I knew, she was hightailing it to Riley. But how come y'all never see each other now? Bertha pressed her lips together and shot me a look out of the corner of her eye. It's kind of complicated, Charlie, she said. There it was again, another not so good answer. So we drove on in silence until we got to Asheville. At the mall, I couldn't help but think about Jackie. She and I used to spend all the day at the mall, wandering from store to store, trying on crop tops and mini skirts that we were never allowed to have, picking out earrings we would buy if our ears were pierced, spritzing fancy perfume on each other from the samples at the cosmetics counter. Let's go to Sears and look for a Sunday school dress, Bertha said. So we shopped all morning. By the time we headed back to Colby, I had 2 new dresses and a lavender cardigan sweater. Bertha thought one of those dresses might be too short for church, but she bought it anyway. When we got home, Howard was sitting in a lawn chair by the garden watching Gus doing some repairs to the fence. "Hey there," Bertha called. Howard walked up his up-down walk to the car as I was getting my shopping bags out of the back seat. "Hey," he said to Bertha. Then he turned to me and said, "I drew a map." "What for?" "To help us look for Wishbone." He took a piece of folded up notebook paper out of his pocket to show me. I figured we could mark the places we look and it would help keep track. I shrugged. "Okay." Bertha reached for the shopping bags. "I'll take those inside," she said. Then me and Howard headed off toward the road, peering into tangled shrubs and squinting into the dark woods along the way. Howard thought we should check the path where he had seen him yesterday. "I bet he hangs out there a lot," he said. "Maybe." I pushed some tall weeds aside, jumped over the shallow ditch that ran along the edge of the road. "But Gus said he's liable to be anywhere," I added. We looked and climbed over fallen trees and pushing through prickly vines, but after a while we were hot and tired and hadn't seen a single sign of Wishbone. So Howard whipped out his map and a stubby pencil and marked the places we had looked, and we decided to call it a day. The next day I marched into Sunday school in my new dress and plopped right down next to Audrey. I said, "Hey," but she acted like I was invisible. I guess she forgot I was part of her church family. First, we had to play that Bible detective game again, and Howard added to his collection of Bible books. I couldn't get over all the stuff he knew about the Bible. What was Moses' brother's name? How many times a day did ravens bring food to Elijah? Audrey waved her hand almost as much as Howard did, jangling her bracelets and going, "I know, I know." After that, Miss Mackey told us we were going to decorate the bulletin board in the fellowship hall, and it would be called our Garden of Blessings. We'd be making a garden of flowers to show our many blessings, she said. Then she explained how we would make construction paper flowers and write one of our blessings on each one. I confess I wasn't too clear exactly what that meant, but I followed everyone else and got colored paper and glue and scissors. I worked real slow, hoping I could see what somebody else was doing. Sure enough, Audrey finished her first flower, a big yellow daisy. Then she used a blue crayon to write on one of the petals, "My Family." My stomach squeezed up and my face felt hot. I put my hands in my lap so nobody could see them shaking. That yellow daisy lay there on the table in front of me, reminding me that I did not belong here, letting me know that even though I was here in church in my new dress, I did not have a blessing. "May I be excused?" I said to Mrs. Mackey, but I didn't even wait for her to answer. I hurried out of the room and went outside to the parking lot. But before I had time to start feeling sorry for myself, something good happened. I saw a red bird, a big bright cardinal, on the telephone line across the street. Closed my eyes, spit 3 times, and made my wish. Chapter 9. "Come to my house after school," Howard said on the bus the next morning. "I have a plan." "What kind of plan?" I asked. "Plan for catching that dog." "Wishbone," I said. "His name is Wishbone." Howard took a bite of toast he had brought on the bus with him. "Whatever," he said. "We still need a better plan than a map." "I don't see why we can't." I sat up and grabbed Howard's knee. "Don't move," I said. His eyes got wide. "What's wrong?" "Take off your glasses," I said, real slow. "Why?" "Just do it." I snapped a little louder than I meant to. He took off his glasses and then squinted over at me. "There's an eyelash right there," I said, pointing to one of the thick lenses. "I need it." "Why?" "To make a wish." "A wish?" If you blow on an eyelash, you get to make a wish. I took the glasses from him, pressed my finger on the lens, then I held it up so Howard could see the tiny reddish eyelash. See, I said. Then I closed my eyes, made my wish, and blew, sending that eyelash out in the air where it disappeared, probably settling on the floor with clumps of dirt and chewed gum and trampled spelling tests. What'd you wish for? Howard asked. I can't tell you, I said. Why not? I flopped back down against the seat and rolled my eyes. Geez, Howard, I said. What? I explained to him that if you tell your wish, that it won't come true. Everybody knows that, I added. Howard wiped his glasses with the end of his t-shirt and put them back on. I've made a wish every single day since 4th grade, I said. Howard bugged his eyes out at me. You must want a lot of stuff. I shook my head. No, just one thing, I said. I always wish for the same thing every single time. The minute I said that, I regretted it. I knew what he was going to say next, and sure enough, he did. Well, if you're making the same wish every time, it must not be coming true, he said. So what's the point? Seems kind of dumb to me. I felt my face turning red, and that familiar feeling of anger started to churn in my stomach, because someday it will come true, I hollered, making a bunch of kids turn in their seats and stare at me. Howard looked at me over the top of his glasses and said, Pineapple. I kicked his backpack hard, sending it sliding out into the aisle of the bus. I confessed to feeling a flicker of regret when some kids laughed at that, but Howard, he picked it up, brushed off the dirt off of it, and said, Pineapple, Charlie, remember. I held on to my mad feelings all morning, taking every opportunity I could to shoot razor-sharp glares at Howard or bump into him real hard over the pencil sharpener. I never should have told him about my wishing. I never told anybody, and now that I had, it did sound dumb. Why would anyone make the same wish every day if it never came true? Maybe I should give up. But then, guess what happened? I looked at the clock. It was 11:11. I closed my eyes and made my wish. By the time I got home from school, my mad feelings about Howard were gone, and I was glad he had a plan to catch Wishbone. When I told Bertha I was going to his house the next day, she was tickled pink. She kept telling me how I was to be friends with Howard because other kids were so mean to him. Even in church, she said. Can you believe that? I didn't tell her I sure could believe that, with the likes of Audrey Mitchell in that so-called church family. That afternoon, Howard dropped into the seat next to me and said, You could borrow my brother Lenny's bike. What for? So you can get home. Better than walking. He took a smashed bag of potato chips out of his backpack and emptied the crumbs into his mouth. I got a real plan, he said, for catching Wishbone. And wasn't that just like Howard, to go right on wanting to help me right after I'd kicked his backpack and been mean to him like I had yesterday. So when the bus stopped at his house, I followed him and Dwight across the weed-filled yard, up the rickety steps, past the ratty couch, and into the sad-looking house. When I stepped inside, I didn't know where to look first. Hamster cage on the coffee table, a drum set in the corner, stacks of books and magazines lining the walls, some kind of tree planted in the rusty bucket by the window. The floor was littered with blankets and pillows and shoes and board games and plastic bowls with popcorn kernels and pretzel crumbs in the bottom. The walls were covered with crayon artwork on construction paper and school papers with cold star stickers that said, Nice job, written on the top. I could see that Mrs. Odom's rutabaga trick with Howard's brother Cotton wasn't working too good because there were lots of drawings with colored markers along the bottom of the walls. Howard stepped over the pillows and stuff and motioned for me to follow him into the kitchen. Mama, he said, Charlie's here. Mrs. Odom turned from the sink and smiled the nicest smile. Well, hey! She wiped her hands on her apron and put her arm around my shoulder and gave me a little squeeze. Howard told me you were his backpack buddy at school, she said, and about that wishbone dog. Then she started going on about how Gus and Bertha were so happy to have me here in Colby with them, and weren't the Blue Ridge Mountains heaven on earth. After that, she put a cake with pink and purple flowers in a cardboard box from the grocery store on the kitchen table and told us to have some. The next thing I knew, that little kitchen was filled with boys pushing and poking and grabbing at the cake. They didn't even use plates or forks for anything. Just cut a slice and ate it right there, dropping crumbs on the floor, and Mrs. Odom didn't seem to mind one bit. The older boy was Burl, the only dark-haired one, loud, talking and friendly face, with the shadow of a mustache over his lip. Next was Lenny, in a grease-stained t-shirt. His freckled arms were long and skinny, and he kept punching Dwight and elbowing Burl. Next came Howard and Dwight, who were only a year or two apart and could have passed for twins, except Howard wore glasses and had that up-down walk. And the youngest was Cotton, dirty-faced and sticky-fingered, legs all covered in scraps and bruises and Band-Aids. Mrs. Odom gave us water in paper cups and made the rounds, kissing and hugging each one of those boys. It didn't take a genius to know that Bertha had been right about the Odoms and their good hearts. I didn't know why, but I felt shy and out of place in there with the noise and the energy bouncing around, sheer goodness clinging to the walls of that house. Howard and I sat on the couch on the porch, and he told me about his plan to catch Wishbone. He had it all written down in a notebook and even had pictures drawn with colored pencils. You think it'll work? I asked. Sure. Howard closed his notebook and hugged it to his chest. Then we sat in silence watching Lenny and Cotton filling a plastic bucket with rocks and dragging it into the side of the yard where they were building some kind of wall. Dwight rode his bike round and round the yard, stirring up clouds of red dirt, while Burl hollered him to stop because he was trying to change the oil in his truck. Then me and Howard decided to look for Wishbone some more. So we spent the rest of the afternoon tromping through the woods and wandering up and down the side of the road, but finally gave up. By the time we got back to Howard's house, Mrs. Odom was telling everybody to wash up for supper. Stay in here and have supper with us, Charlie, she said. Before I could say anything, Mrs. Odom added, I called Bertha and she said it's okay with her. Mrs. Odom driving a load of lumber over to Charlotte so you can sit right there in his chair. So we sat at the table, and before I knew what was happening, Howard grabbed my right hand and Dwight grabbed my left, and they all bowed their heads. And while Burl said the blessing, he thanked the Lord for nearly everything under the sun, including the deviled eggs on the plate in front of him. Then everybody said amen and dove into that food like they hadn't eaten in a week. Mrs. Odom kept jumping up to get more pork chops or more milk, pour more milk, and it seemed like she couldn't walk by one of those boys without putting their shoulders or kissing the top of their heads. Patting their shoulders, or kissing the top of their heads. I tried to imagine taking Howard to my house back in Riley, so quiet and dark, my school papers would not be taped to the wall, and my mama would not kiss me on the top of my head. There wouldn't be any cake with pink or purple flowers. Howard stayed for supper. He and I would eat pork and beans or potato chips or a bologna sandwich in front of the TV, and nobody would say the blessing. When it was time for me to leave, I thanked Mrs. Odom, climbed onto Lenny's bike, and set off for home. As I pedaled up the road, I turned and glanced back at the Odom's house. I remembered that first day on the school bus when I had seen it and thought it was so sad looking. Then I pictured all those boys in the little kitchen getting loved on by their mama, and that house didn't look one bit sad anymore. Tune in next time as we read chapter 10.